Don't scroll. This wasn't supposed to happen. A courtroom was packed, the cameras were rolling, and the trial was about to begin. But the second the judge looked at the defendant, he slammed his gavel and shouted, "Everyone out now." Even the lawyers froze. Why would an experienced judge stop a trial before a single word of testimony? The answer uncovered a secret buried for over 20 years, and it changed everything. The courthouse was unusually busy that Monday morning. News reporters lined the entrance with cameras pointed toward the courthouse steps, hoping to capture footage of another high-profile criminal trial. Spectators filled the hallways, whispering about the case that had dominated local headlines for weeks. Everyone expected a routine day in court, but no one imagined they were about to witness something that would be remembered for years. Inside Courtroom 5, the atmosphere was calm but tense. Court officers carefully arranged evidence on long wooden tables. Attorneys organized thick stacks of legal files while the court clerk prepared the official records. Jurors quietly took their assigned seats, exchanging nervous glances as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Everything appeared completely normal. The bailiff stood and announced in a loud voice, "All rise." Judge William Harrison entered the courtroom wearing his traditional black judicial robe. Throughout his 30-year career, he had earned a reputation for remaining calm under pressure and treating everyone fairly, regardless of the charges they faced. He nodded politely toward the courtroom before taking his seat behind the large wooden bench. "You may be seated." The room settled into silence. Moments later, 2 deputies escorted the defendant into the courtroom. His name was Daniel Carter, 28 years old. Accused of participating in a sophisticated financial fraud scheme involving stolen identities, fake business contracts, and forged financial records that investigators claimed had cost victims hundreds of thousands of dollars. Unlike many defendants, Daniel wasn't wearing a prison uniform. Instead, he wore a simple gray suit. Although he tried to appear confident, his shaking hands revealed how nervous he truly was. His attorney quietly whispered reassuring words while arranging legal documents on the defense table. Across the room, the prosecutor confidently organized several binders filled with evidence. Everything was prepared. The trial was finally ready to begin. Judge Harrison opened the official case file. He glanced at the first page before looking toward the defendant. "Mr. Carter, please stand." Daniel slowly rose from his chair. The courtroom became completely still. Judge Harrison looked directly at him. Then, something unexpected happened. The judge's expression suddenly changed. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. For several long seconds, he stared silently at Daniel without saying a single word. No one understood why. Even the court reporter stopped typing. The prosecutor looked confused. Daniel nervously shifted his weight. His attorney leaned closer and quietly asked, "Are you all right?" Daniel simply shook his head. Then, without warning, Judge Harrison forcefully slammed his gavel against the bench. The loud sound echoed throughout the courtroom. Everyone out. Nobody moved. People looked around, wondering if they had heard correctly. The judge raised his voice. "Everyone leaves this courtroom immediately." A wave of confusion swept across the room. The spectators exchanged puzzled looks. The attorneys stared at one another. Even the jurors appeared completely shocked. Finally, the prosecutor cautiously stood. "Your Honor, is there a problem?" Judge Harrison didn't answer. Instead, he looked directly at the deputies. "Clear the courtroom." Immediately, within seconds, court officers began escorting everyone toward the exits. Reporters protested. Law students whispered among themselves. Members of the jury asked questions that no one answered. The heavy wooden courtroom doors slowly closed behind them. Outside, confusion quickly spread throughout the courthouse. Some people believed there had been a security threat. Others suspected a witness had revealed explosive new evidence. Several reporters rushed to broadcast breaking news despite having no idea what had actually happened. Inside the now nearly empty courtroom remained only Judge Harrison, Daniel Carter, both attorneys, the bailiff, and a few senior court officials. The silence inside the room felt overwhelming. Judge Harrison slowly removed his glasses and carefully placed them on the bench. He continued staring at Daniel as though trying to remember something buried deep in his memory. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Carter." His voice sounded noticeably softer. "Have we met before?" Daniel looked genuinely confused. I don't believe so, Your Honor." The judge didn't respond. Instead, he opened a small drawer beneath the bench. From inside, he removed an old photograph. The edges had become worn with age. The colors had faded over time. It was obvious the picture had been kept for many years. Judge Harrison slowly held it toward Daniel. "Take a careful look." Daniel stared at the photograph. Within seconds, his face turned pale. His breathing became heavier. His hands began shaking even more than before. The prosecutor immediately noticed his reaction. "Mr. Carter, do you recognize that photograph?" Daniel struggled to speak. Finally, in a barely audible voice, he whispered, "Yes." The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Harrison slowly asked another question. "Tell everyone. Who is the little boy standing beside that man?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He looked down at the floor before quietly answering, "That's me." A wave of shock spread across the courtroom. Even the prosecutor looked stunned. Judge Harrison took a deep breath. Then he quietly spoke the words that changed everything. "I knew your father." No one said a word. Daniel stared at the judge in complete disbelief. "My father?" Judge Harrison slowly nodded. 20 years ago. I made him a promise." Daniel's attorney slowly stood. "Your Honor, would you please explain what this has to do with today's trial?" Judge Harrison looked around the silent courtroom. His expression was filled with emotion. "What I'm about to tell you changes everything." No one inside that courtroom realized that a forgotten promise made more than 20 years earlier was about to uncover a connection so extraordinary that it would forever change the course of Daniel Carter's trial and leave everyone questioning what true justice really means. The courtroom remained completely silent. No one dared to speak as Judge Harrison carefully placed the old photograph on the bench. Every eye in the room was fixed on the faded picture that had somehow brought an entire criminal trial to a sudden stop. Daniel couldn't stop staring at it. His hands trembled. His breathing became heavier. For a long moment, the judge said nothing. Then, in a calm voice, he finally broke the silence. 20 years ago, your father saved my life." The prosecutor looked stunned. The defense attorney blinked in disbelief. Daniel slowly raised his head. "My father saved you?" Judge Harrison nodded. "Yes, he did." He took a slow breath before continuing. "Before I became a judge, I served as a federal prosecutor. I was assigned to a dangerous organized crime investigation involving money laundering, extortion, and corruption. During that investigation, I received several death threats." The courtroom listened carefully. "One evening, after leaving my office, I walked toward my car without realizing someone had sabotaged it." He paused. "My brakes had been cut." The room fell silent again. "Your father owned a small auto repair shop nearby. He happened to notice something leaking beneath my vehicle. He stopped me just seconds before I drove away." Judge Harrison looked at Daniel. "Had I driven that car, I probably wouldn't have survived." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I never knew any of this." The judge smiled sadly. "Your father never wanted recognition. He simply told me to go home and hug my family. I promised him that I would never forget his kindness." The courtroom remained completely silent. Finally, the prosecutor slowly stood. "Your Honor, if you had a personal relationship with the defendant's father, does that affect today's proceedings?" Judge Harrison answered immediately. "It absolutely does." The room became tense. "As judges, we must remain completely impartial. Even though my connection is with Mr. Carter's late father and not with the defendant himself, it creates the appearance of a possible conflict of interest." He looked toward both attorneys. "For that reason, I cannot continue presiding over this trial." A wave of surprise spread through the room. Daniel's attorney slowly nodded. "I appreciate the court's honesty." The prosecutor agreed. The integrity of the judicial system depends on impartiality. Judge Harrison signed several legal documents before handing them to the court clerk. "I am officially recusing myself from this case. It will immediately be reassigned to another judge." Everyone expected the hearing to end. But before stepping away from the bench, Judge Harrison looked at Daniel one final time. "There is something your father wanted you to know." Daniel looked up. "What is it?" The judge smiled gently. "After that day, your father and I remained friends. When he became seriously ill years later, I visited him several times in the hospital." Daniel wiped tears from his face. "He never told me." Judge Harrison nodded. "He didn't want you to see him as a hero. He wanted you to simply remember him as your father." The judge paused before continuing. "On my last visit, he asked me for one favor." Daniel listened carefully. "He asked me to remind you, if our paths ever crossed, that one mistake should never define the rest of your life." The courtroom became emotional. He said you were a good young man. He believed you had a kind heart. But he worried that one bad decision might convince you that your future was over. Daniel could no longer hold back his tears. I wish I had one more chance to tell him I'm sorry. Judge Harrison quietly replied. The best apology you can give your father is not with words. It's by choosing a better path from this day forward. The courtroom remained silent. Judge Harrison stood from the bench. This case will now continue before another judge who has no personal connection to anyone involved. That is how justice must work. Several weeks later, the case was reassigned. The new judge carefully reviewed every witness statement, financial record, and piece of evidence. During the trial, investigators confirmed that Daniel had not organized the fraud scheme. Instead, he had been manipulated by experienced business partners who hid important facts and used him to sign documents he barely understood. Daniel accepted responsibility for his own poor decisions. He cooperated fully with investigators. He testified honestly against the leaders of the operation. He helped authorities recover stolen money and identify additional victims. Because of his cooperation, his clean criminal history, and the evidence showing his limited role, the court imposed a sentence focused on restitution, community service, financial education, and supervised probation instead of a lengthy prison term. Daniel accepted the decision without complaint. Months later, he found steady employment and began rebuilding his life. He volunteered at local youth centers, sharing his story with teenagers and encouraging them to think carefully before trusting the wrong people or making shortcuts that could change their future. Judge Harrison followed the case only through public news reports. He never contacted Daniel again. He believed maintaining professional boundaries was part of honoring the law. One afternoon, however, he received a handwritten letter. It read, "Thank you for keeping your promise to my father, not by helping me escape responsibility, but by protecting the fairness of the courtroom. You showed me that real justice means everyone is treated equally." Judge Harrison quietly folded the letter and placed it beside the old photograph that had remained in his desk for more than 20 years. As the sun set outside the courthouse, one lesson became unforgettable. Justice is never about personal feelings. It is built on honesty, fairness, integrity, and sometimes, the greatest act of justice is having the courage to step aside so the truth can be judged without doubt. If you enjoyed this emotional courtroom story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable courtroom dramas, shocking twists, and powerful stories of justice.